What's up, everybody? This is Brian Burley, Politician Reacts YouTube channel, live streaming on Facebook and then posting on YouTube later. We're discussing the recall today with Phil, California Underground. He has his own YouTube channel, Facebook page, but he's big on Instagram and has his own podcast. So thank you for joining us, Phil.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we discussed a few things, but I guess, we'll discuss a number of topics throughout this whole stream here and video. But what are your views on the recall? Obviously it qualified yesterday. There's a number of different news events that happened yesterday, including redistricting, and that also didn't favor California very well. What are your thoughts on the recall now that it's qualified? Where do you think we go from here?
Well, the one thing I heard a lot of people say is that they never thought the recall would actually get certified. I think there's a lot of people who were shocked that there were as many signatures as there were, and they didn't believe there were going to be enough signatures, and then when they get 2.1, what they gathered, I think they were kind of caught off guard. It just shows you sort of like disconnect with the right and left, maybe not even right and left, because it is sort of a bipartisan across the spectrum recall. The disconnect of what people are hearing. So then now the opinion that I'm hearing from people who oppose it is, well, yeah, it qualified, but he won't lose. There's no way he'll lose. I'm like, I would, you also didn't say that it was going to qualify. And I think one of the biggest factors when it comes to the recall is going to be whether Democrats jump into the race. And that can change the entire field. So my biggest, I off the top of my head, I'm feeling like an Antonio Villaraigosa, the former mayor of LA.
That's been the guy I've been thinking will jump in.
Yeah, and I'm thinking he'll jump in because he's got nothing to lose. Like, basically, his political career right now is dead in the water. He's not going anywhere. He lost governor. He can't go back to being mayor. So at this point, he's really got nowhere else to go. And I think he would definitely entertain the idea of jumping in, which could peel Democratic voters away. And just to kind of explain the recall again, when we go to vote in the recall, we're going to get two questions. We're going to get the first question, which is, do you want to recall Gavin Newsom or not?
Removal,
Do you think he should be removed? And the second question is, who do you want to replace him? Now, if you put it in a vacuum and say, do you want to recall Gavin Newsom? There's going to be a lot of Democrats who say, yeah, I don't really want to recall him. I think he's doing fine. But if you give them an option of other Democrats who can come out and say, I have this platform that's better than Gavin Newsom, now you've created this rift where there's going to be people who say, maybe I want to recall him so I could vote for an Antonio Villaraigosa. Now all of a sudden it's chaos. You get a little bit more of a wild card that could really cause problems for Newsom. If there's no Democrats, then it probably won't likely pass the first question. But once a couple Democrats jump in, I think that's a better chance.
I wonder what the Villaraigosa-Newsom relationship is. I mean, in terms politically, if he owes him any, respect, or if, this might be Villaraigosa's only chance, if to your point, because I don't know if he'd run again after Newsom's termed out. But a quick thing, so you have your own podcast, you're big on Instagram. Where's the best place to find you so the people that are just jumping in now can? And what has been the goal of your Instagram and podcast throughout? You said it's been going for 3 years, your podcast, but if you want to tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, the best place to find me is Instagram. That's where I post most of my content. I do lives a lot. Every Wednesday morning, we do something called Coffee in California Politics. We're just a live, and we just kind of sit and we chat about whatever people want to chat about. Sometimes I have topics. I'll bring up news stories. But really, it's just up to the people who hop on. We kind of sit and we chat for an hour. Then the podcast comes out every Friday, and that's a little bit more like a deep dive into what's going on around the state. I like to have people on as well, like interviews. Last week, we had Melanie Burkholder, who's running for, district, 7th district for state assembly. I'll probably have more guests on. But the main goal of why I started California Underground was because I felt there wasn't a place for people who were not far left to go and express their viewpoint. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of the reason I called it the California Underground, is it's kind of like this underground society of business. you're anything right of far left or statist, then you can't really express that view in public for fear of like being bullied or retribution or anything like that. So it's really a space for people who are like moderate Democrats, independents, Republicans, libertarians, all that to kind of come share ideas on like common sense solutions to California.
Yeah, and I think I think a lot of people we were just talking maybe noticed you because of the whole situation with Major and all that. Because I noticed that's me and my friend were discussing. Oh, what's going on with him? And what are some of these controversies? And when we look it up, your podcast is one of the first things that come up on on the search results. My friend, he's pretty involved politically as I am, and he had even some stuff, had some issues with him that you didn't even cover, other people didn't cover, that no one's talked about publicly. It's not necessarily my job to, and I wanted to make it clear, even though we published our polling results the other day, we weren't trying to pick on one candidate, but we email 2 million registered voters, a lot of them right leaning, and he doesn't have the name recognition, and that's what the poll showed. And just typically speaking, I know that you were like, well, how is John Cox so far ahead? Well, he's starting with a huge lead theoretically, just based off of name recognition. You're talking about 20 million plus voters that haven't heard of Rick Grinnell if he decides to jump in, Kevin Faulconer, who's already in, Major if he stays in, and if he decides to run either now or in the future, if he looks at 2022, if it doesn't look viable, whatever these candidates decide to do. And also, Kevin Kiley was discussed, although I heard he's apparently not considering it at this time as much as maybe he was in the past. So, with that in mind, maybe if we jump into some of each of the candidates. So, what do you think the state of the recall is in terms of the replacement candidates? We just talked about Villaraigosa potentially jumping on the Democratic side, and I was talking to somebody yesterday that if there's no Democrat and on the replacement list, but you also have and the recall succeeds, then a Republican is guaranteed to almost win unless they just vote for default Democrat. If there's only one Democrat, and if it's all just party line, and if it somehow fails. So, what do you think the state of the race is with the replacement candidates on the Republican side?
Well, it's always it changes every week, and I think I have a couple days left to see if my prediction that Rick Grinnell jumps in this week is proven right or wrong. But I have a feeling he might be waiting to see if the recall has been official. Now that it is official, I think there's a good chance he jumps in this week. With that said, I think someone like a Rick Grinnell is dead in the water as soon as he announces, because it's my personal belief, and it's just what I see, and it's very anecdotal, is Trump is toxic in California.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because it's not an emotional thing. I voted for Trump. I like Trump. I miss him. I miss his wacky press conferences and insulting the media. But the truth of the matter is there's only 25% registered Republicans. And I think that's something you have to keep in mind going forward with any of these recall candidates, is that only 25% of all the registered voters in California are Republican, with 25 being declined to state and 50% being Democrat. So even if you got a Rick Grinnell into the race and he was able to galvanize, 20 of that 25% of Republicans, how many is he going to peel away from independent Democrats needed to be the governor of the state?
So this is what I thought. I agreed with you at first. And, a lot of Republicans were just trying to push him because of, identity politics, or, he's a homosexual, so people in San Francisco are going to vote for him. I heard this from a ton of people, which I just don't agree with. And we can get into identity politics in a little bit here, and how I think that a lot of people are trying to push that with, whether it be Caitlyn Jenner, or I know you guys are, you've been covering Joe Collins and Major Williams. A lot of it's identity politics. But, that's what people tried to sell me on Rick Grinnell at first, was, it's because of his, identity as his sexual orientation. I'm like, that's no reason to vote for somebody in my book. But he also he was more aligned, pre-Trump with the Romney, kind of wing of the party. I don't know, and it gets back to the point of educating the voters. At least what we've seen this week in our polls that Grinnell has gotten, we're not going to publish because we're still gathering results for the current poll, that Grinnell obviously continues to go up, but it's just because people are trying to find a consensus candidate. I don't know if Newsom's going to be able to spend a lot of time, or the anti-recall effort will spend a lot of time trying to label these replacements as pro-Trump, because they're going to have their hands full trying to defend him. I don't know if you agree with that assessment, but the more I've thought about it, the more I've listened to Grinnell. He doesn't sound Trumpian at all, but I agreed with your original assessment. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think for guys like you and me who can, or any political person who can kind of dive into it, the fact that you have to dive those many levels down to make the argument for Grinnell, I think is a bad sign. And I think because he has that Trump attachment. Same thing with Caitlyn Jenner. Regardless of whether she wants to say she wasn't really a Trumper, there's a picture of her driving around a convertible with the Make America Great Again hat on. You're dead on arrival as well. And you have to look at it from the powerful Newsom machine is going to run with that and absolutely pound people into the ground and say, do you want a Trump acolyte or a Trump follower who believes in racism, bigotry, and hates people of color, and And it doesn't matter if you're trans or gay or anything. They're going to pound that message of Trump is divisive and Trump was horrible. And they're going to show videos of January 6th and say, is this what you want for California? And that's going to turn off a lot of the undecided voters, suburban moms, stuff like that, which is why I don't think they have the potential to build a coalition, because they'll play on that emotion, and those two will definitely be dead in the water right away just because of their Trump connections.
I agree with you with Jenner. We'll see how it plays out. Like I said, I've been pleasantly surprised already. So I mean, it's obviously early. I thought it was going to be a Cox and Faulkner battle early on, but it looks like it's where I see all the establishment money and backing kind of going behind the scenes, it is towards Grinnell. If you look at some of the events that are going on behind the scenes, I know I sent you an event about what he's working on behind the scenes with a PAC as well. So we'll see what happens. You mentioned, Caitlyn Jenner. One thing we've been polling people, and the options are Newsom. If you had to choose between Newsom and Jenner, obviously that won't be the choice, but that's what the poll's asking. If you had to choose between Newsom and Jenner, who would you prefer to be your governor? And Newsom actually does bring a couple more people back into the fold among right-leaning voters, which is kind of crazy to think.
Wow.
But there was an option of, I would not vote at all if these were my two choices. And at least so far, and it's still early in the polling, where we've got another 5 to 6 days to do it. And then we'll probably have to take another couple more days to compile it all and make it look good. Is anywhere from 30 to 45% said they wouldn't vote, which is to me is pretty eye opening. But what do you think the angle is for Caitlyn Jenner jumping in this race? Do you think it's all publicity filled? Are you planning to cover it on your podcast, or what would be your initial observation?
Of course, I plan on covering everybody. I'm not just this isn't just the Major Williams hate podcast. We can get to him in a bit. But I plan on covering every one of them, because I've said this before. And when people say, well, why did you go after Major Williams so hard? It's because we have this unique opportunity in California to change people's minds and perceptions. You have a lot of people who, because of COVID, because of the way it was handled, all the scandals, the French Laundry, a lot of people who at the beginning of COVID were far left. Oh, we have to listen to the government. We have to do what they say. Had, by the end of it, turned around and said, I don't know if I really believe everything the government's telling me. I don't think they made all the best choices. There probably was a better way to handle this. So you have a lot of people who, at this moment in time, have open minds to maybe being persuaded. So when I want to not go after, but I want to highlight each candidate and say, is this a good choice? Is this a logical choice? What's their end goal? If Caitlyn Jenner is only doing it for publicity, I haven't even looked up Caitlyn Jenner, to be honest. I haven't at her website. Someone told me it's just all merchandise
Yep,
right now.
that's
Like
what I'm
there's
hearing
no
too.
policies, which is a bad sign right off the bat. If your website is already just buy my stuff, as opposed to here's why I'm running, here's my policies, that's already a bad sign in my book. It means that you're not really interested in policies. It's like, hey, I'm a transgender and I'm running for governor. Is that me? So buy my stuff.
Yeah, I've always said that if somehow, and I don't know how it worked with term limits in the way that they were implemented, because obviously Jerry Brown was able to come back. If Arnold Schwarzenegger would come back, he would probably be the guy that we should rally behind, because as much as people don't like him, and I don't like everything about him, he would almost guarantee if it does succeed that if there was a Democrat that he would get a buttload of votes, and he's better than Newsom. And I think
No,
you don't think he's better than Newsom?
no, I think it would be better than Newsom.
Oh, I thought you
Yeah,
said no.
no, no. I was saying, yeah,
But
absolutely. There's
obviously,
a
I
lot
don't
of.
I don't see that happening.
I think my mailman would probably be better than Newsom at this point. So like, I'm not. I don't have high hopes for. And the sad thing was, I thought Newsom in the beginning actually was handling the coronavirus pretty well. I thought he was handling it basically because California is so big. He kind of was handling it like a president, where he's like, okay, each county is so different. I'm just going to let the counties figure it out. We'll give you the
That
tools
changed
and the
quickly, didn't
resources.
it?
And all of a sudden, overnight, he was like, nope, I'm going to be the dictator and have the final say on everything.
Yeah.
And that's when it really went downhill for Newsom. I think that's what accelerated the recall really quickly, because there's one person to blame, and that was a bad move on his part.
Yeah, back to Caitlyn Jenner, but I wondered if, your first instinct, especially with having the Trump social media, specialist on board, is that somehow, maybe Caitlyn Jenner can conjure up that type of enthusiasm that Arnold Schwarzenegger did. I don't see it happening. I kind of talked about that in my reaction video to like a panel that was discussing a potential Caitlyn Jenner uh, run. So let's talk about John Cox real quick. What if you had to put your
Yeah,
money, on the
sorry,
race? Oh, I'm
I'm
sorry.
looking to see if I can even find Caitlyn Jenner's website. I
Oh,
can't even find it.
yeah. It's not even like I was trying to Google search result everything for it. I couldn't find it, but apparently from the
Uh,
people I've talked to, there's hats and everything, and that's all
yeah,
there is. Kind of confirming what you were saying.
yeah, yeah. Sorry. So you can go
Oh yeah.
John
So
Cox.
I was gonna say, if you had to, if you had $100 and if you wanted to double your money on any of the candidates, I think a month ago, you would have probably put your money on John Cox. That might still be the case. If the election were held today, you would put your money on John Cox just based off of pure name recognition. What do you think about his campaign? Do you think he's the favorite, or do you think somebody else would be the favorite at this point?
Now, I think you, in your polling, the way you explained it to me, connected those dots for me as to why he did so well. Because in my mind, I remember 2018. I remember what like bad campaign he ran against Newsom, and he just like laid down and died in 2018. So to me, the fact that people were still like, "Oh, let's vote for John Cox, and he's a good candidate, we should go back to it." It's like the guy lost by a margin of
Yeah,
like 2-1. He got clobbered. Like he thinks he has like a fighting shot again. But when you explained it to me and said it's name recognition, I said, okay, that makes more sense because he just ran 2 years ago. So that would definitely make, or 3 years ago, sorry, that would make more sense. Um, I don't think he's a good candidate. And I've told this story before about him and Travis Allen in 2018. And I'll just give the abbreviated version. At the California GOP convention in 2018 here in San Diego, you couldn't get close to Travis Allen. He was a rock star. The man had so many people, pictures, autographs. He couldn't walk like 5 feet without people mobbing. John Cox could walk down the hallway. People wouldn't barely look up from their phones and care who he was. Now is that anecdotal? Maybe, but it just shows you at the California GOP convention, you had one candidate who
yeah,
had all the energy behind him, John Cox, who nobody was really excited about, somehow win the nomination. I don't think he's that great of a candidate, to be honest. Like, what about an old white guy, an old rich white guy, is is very palpable to California voters. I mean, he's like the antithesis of what a lot of people on the left hate anyway, old rich white guys.
Well, if I can kind of piggyback on what you were saying earlier, I thought there was a lot of good things that Travis Allen did, but a lot of reason to why he lost, which it was all about Trump.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, his campaign was, I'm a Trump supporter. John Cox doesn't support Trump, and I'm running in 45 with redistricting. We'll see what the numbers are, but that's Katie Porter's current seat. And if you look at where Romney was versus Trump, it was a 12-point flip. It's not a 12. We shouldn't be losing that district by 7 points, 6 points, but because of the Trump factor, which he won't be on the ballot. The same ballot as this recall. He won't be on the same ballot in 2022. There's going to be depressed Democratic turnout. You would think, at least naturally, unless they're able to your point, try to label Republicans as the the equivalent of Donald Trump here in California, which they didn't have to for Travis Allen. So I think Cox, with the money he had, and not being that candidate that Travis Allen was in a state where Trump isn't the most popular, it almost handed it to John Cox. If you look at it, if you look back on it now, but that's just my assessment. I don't know if you agree with that or.
Another sinister reason why they pushed for John Cox, and this was before Jessica Malone Patterson took over. I don't know if it's changed, maybe not. But this is something I think I want to do a deep dive into, is the kind of corruption behind like political consultants who advise conservative candidates, especially candidates like a Joe Collins or really basically absolutely no chance of winning, but still make crap ton of money and spend that crap ton of money on political consultants. A buddy of mine who was an insider told me a while back, the problem with the California GOP is that they're run by the consulting class. Basically, whoever the consultants see has the most money, say, okay, we're going to push that guy, and we're going to really push to sell him as the nominee, because we know, selfishly, that we could then work with him to make a crap ton of money off of his running, because he has money. And it's a sinister way to look at it, but he's been involved in California politics, especially California Republican politics, for a long time, that it made sense to me that, well, he's got a lot of money, he'd probably spend a lot of money on consultants. Consultants want to make money, so behind the scenes they're probably pushing to get John Cox to be the guy.
I think it's a different layer with the California GOP. I mean, obviously I've dealt with them personally. I'm now technically on the Central Committee of OCGOP, and there was a decision, back when I was in college, which I'm only 28 now, so believe it or not, it wasn't that long ago. Less than 6 years ago. And what we've seen, the decision that we made as a party was to, approach campaigns to be like the left, to use identity politics. And it worked in some races, but for the most part it didn't. And now we're kind of getting the aftermath of that. The party, I'm sure the consultant class has something to do with it, but I think it has to do with career politicians trying to protect their positions, trying to work their way up the ladder. I mean, if you look at, we'll get into the supervisor race a little bit to talk about vote splitting in a little bit, but a lot of that was, you had John Morlock and you have Janet Wynn, and these people are just literally like playing hot potato with seats, and they're just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. When that's, we've been in a period of time where whether you love Trump or not, his candidacy and candidacies after that, even the ones that are identity politics or not identity politics centered, prove that people didn't want a career politician. But in the California GOP, in the Orange County Republican Party, when I tried to, I voted to, for new leadership on the Orange County, leadership, like new leaders on the Central Committee, and I was one of 3 Republicans out of 61. So it's because a lot of those people are worried about their own endorsements. They're not worried about, the future of the party. And, back in 2015, 2016, when, there was a window when we thought the left was going to go so extreme, which they have now with COVID, we knew we needed a strong, as a young conservative involved with college Republicans, helping campaigns, we knew we needed a strong conservative movement with well-rounded candidates for when that opportunity opened up, when the left did go off the deep end. But we kind of, missed the mark in a lot of ways. So going about a long way. It's a lot of it is probably the consultant class and works with probably more of the career politicians that they want their paycheck on their way out. They're going to leave California on a sinking island. That's my perception of it. Not everybody agrees with it. We can't get any change in terms of our structure of how our party works anymore, and we've done the same thing even though we're losing. And to me, that's that could be the reason why if it is I don't think it's a Republican recall, but if the Republican movement and the conservative movement needs to be active and out to vote, if we're not organized, it's because of that, because of lack of organization and structure at the state level and the county levels.
No. I was just having that conversation today about how the local parties they're not representative of what California is. I went to a San Diego Central Committee Republican event a couple of weeks ago, and they actually had four of these guys, Major Williams, John Cox, Kevin Faulkner, and Doug Ossie, speaking. But you walked in, and it just did not look representative of what California is. And that's, I think, an issue with local party leadership. They just seem to keep thinking, this is the year if we just, really keep hammering home this message. This is the year. And it's like,
do the same thing as what they're trying to do.
Yeah, you keep trying to pound a square peg into a round hole. You're not trying to change things, and you continue to lose more and more voters. But people who are in charge of these central committees just don't really see that. They say, well, this is what we've been doing for years. It's how this guy did it. This guy did it. This guy did it.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and you think, that's what I always say is like, whether you love Trump or not, you have to adjust to the changing political climate. And I feel like our party's kind of still living in that 2012 to 2013 era where things were looking up and they decided to follow the path that they were. So we talked about John Cox, Caitlyn Jenner, Rick Grinnell at this point. We haven't talked about Kevin Faulkner, which... the more that I look at our data and the more that I hear from people, and when I reacted to Kevin Faulkner's ad, he might be the consensus candidate if we all are. If Grinnell doesn't jump in, or even if he does and if he runs into the issues you did, and if people decide, hey, we don't want John Cox this time, or if Jenner's also dead on arrival, which might happen, he could be the consensus candidate. I don't know if you agree with that. I see a lot of, in our polling, he's pretty strong among people's top three choices.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, consensus. When people ask me, like, who do I think? Logically, and just based on the numbers, how he won here in San Diego, the voter makeup winning here in a coastal city, his appeal ability makes sense to create that consensus, or I call it a coalition of voters that works on the state level. And I know a lot of people hear that, they think he's a rhino. That's a whole different story about whether you think California Republicans should be different than Texas Republicans and conservative-wise. But I think that's a good way to put it, is consensus. I think he appeals to different demographics. I think he's palpable to moderate Democrats. I think he's palpable because I've heard I have Democrat friends here in San Diego who said, oh, I like Faulkner. I think he did pretty well. Independent. He kind of kept Trump at arm's length. There is a picture of him in the White House. That was part of a mayor's meeting. Mayors from all over the country were there. He speaks a little Spanish. He's been hitting the Latino news channels a lot, which is a good move on his part to really go out there. Even though Spanish is fluent, he at least goes out there and tries to make an effort to speak with the Latino.
That's smart.
California. So I think he's figuring out how many pockets can I pull voters from. And that's the numbers game that he's learning, or California Republicans should get better at learning, is I can pull from Republicans, I can pull a little from independents, I can pull from moderate Democrats, I can pull from Latinos, I could maybe pull from the Asian community. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, you have that coalition or that consensus that gets you across the finish.
Yeah, he could almost run, if there's not a Democrat on the ballot, probably the most palpable, outreach to the left without, really losing his values or his message, I think. I thought his ad was pretty good. I thought, it was a little, I don't know if you saw any of my reactions to some of them. They were all, his probably said the most in the shortest amount of time, which is probably the goal. We had Major Williams that said whole lot of nothing in 3.5 minutes. We had John Cox that looked like it was a high schooler did it. And I felt like Kevin Faulkner's, messaging is very strong. We talked about the California comeback. That's something I often reference in our campaign materials for my campaigns as well. So, yeah, I think he's the consensus candidate. But we'll see if that actually plays out that way. Our polling right now shows Grinnell continues to go up. Maybe he comes back down. Maybe Faulkner has money behind him. I know Faulkner has a pretty good fundraising mechanism, and he's posted some big numbers. So, well,
I think he's. I think he might be. I feel like he might be the chosen one, getting a feeling from the San Diego event I went to a couple weeks ago. I think Cox isn't the chosen one this time, and I think based on what I've heard from people and their interactions, is that Cox is a little angry over the fact that he's not the chosen one this time.
Oh yeah,
like Kevin Faulkner, and he just does not like Kevin Faulkner. You can always tell who's leading in any political race by who you're attacking. And at that event, all three of the candidates not named Kevin Faulkner all took digs at Kevin Faulkner. And they all said, well, we don't need a Democrat like, we don't need a career politician, we need a real conservative. And you could tell they're definitely going after Kevin Faulkner, which makes you think that he's the guy to beat right now. So
yeah, I've before Grinnell and there was more scuttlebutt, and I actually heard yesterday that Grinnell isn't running. But I don't know if that's true or not. Like, that would totally throw everything back to Faulkner, I think, if that's the case. Because there's some sources out there that say that Grinnell doesn't think it's going to succeed, so that's why he doesn't want to jump in. I don't know if there's any truth to that. This is just what I heard. It was a pretty good source that's been around the Republican Party, way longer than I've been alive in let alone been involved in politics in California. So, we'll see what happens with that. But I think he would have been the favorite, if people didn't think that, either. And he still could be. He could still be the consensus candidate if we're all arguing that we have to get behind, somebody. He could easily be that guy. I would be mistaken if I didn't bring up Major Williams, considering, you've covered him quite a bit. And I think he's really the last candidate we'll cover because, I get some flack about some of our polling. Why don't you include this person or this person? And we almost didn't include Kevin Kiley or Major Williams in the poll we're conducting now because I don't see a pathway to victory at all. There's just not, the math isn't there. We dropped Rhonda Furin and Earl Weber or Weber? I always pronounce his name wrong.
Earl Weber. Yeah, I think he dropped out anyway. So.
Yeah, and I didn't mean it. I tell everybody it's nothing personal. It's just we need to try our best to, if we can't, I think people will stay in the race, but if we at least put all our effort behind one, it obviously helps our chances if they get all the oxygen, and then if we cut off our attention to the other campaigns. So that's kind of where I was at with Major. I reached out to Major and I said, do you really want to put yourself through this? Do you really want to put yourself and your family through this? And I think if you saw some of his posts this last week, it's that it's been weighing on him. He's maybe coming to terms with it, but I won't admit it publicly or admit it. And he can't if he's running and if he's fundraising. It would look really bad. He should drop out if that was the case. Having run for office, I ran against Michelle Steele in 48, and I had $400,000 dumped on me in mailers in the first 10 days of when voting started. She wasn't very happy about it, and the results would have been much. I'm sure that the results would have been much closer if there wasn't 10 straight days of Michelle Steele mailers in every Republican and Independent's mailbox. People forget that her campaign wasn't happy about that. If I would have been more aware, if I would have had people around me at the time that said, okay, look at all this mail, think about it logically, we might have done some stuff differently. I don't know what. I mean, I was pretty upset with the way the OCGOP handled things. So back to the point of Major, and I kind of mentioned it on one of your posts, is that we have to approach trying to get these people out the right way. And they're going to, he's going to make one of two choices. He's going to either recognize it and rebel, and say, screw it, I'm running anyways. You're motivating me to want to do it more. Or he's going to acknowledge it and have good people around him that says, hey, look at the math. Or people left him. A lot of people left his campaign. That would be a good sign of that, because people I talked to that worked for him, he didn't even ask for their opinions. He just kind of like responded to everything on social media. So I'm going to leave it to you. You can kind of tell me about, obviously you covered it in your podcast. That's where I first heard your, what me and my friend, define as you have a radio voice. And then, I've kind of, I've seen some more stuff on social media. So what do you think about now that, over the last month, what's happened? Our poll did show his numbers plummet, but they weren't that high to begin with. What are your thoughts about Major Williams at this point? What do you think the best way to approach candidates is when, we're trying to obviously
try and get them to step aside for a,
not even maybe step aside, but at least acknowledge, if Earl Weber, sorry, I don't really want to say Weber. I think it's because of the email company, A Weber. I don't know if you've heard of that marketing company. So if he would have stayed in, he was at like 0.5% in the poll, which when you expand that out, if he's that in a very, my people that are responding to my poll are probably more informed than the average public that just, they're going to take their kids to soccer practice. They're going and they go to the poll and they said, oh, what name did I see the most? I'm going to vote for that person. Which kind of gets me back to the whole like anti-Trump thing. I think it'll be really hard to tie it to 20 million people, educating 20 million people on who's a pro-Trump candidate when you have Newsom with only so much money and he's probably going to defend himself and say what he did. That'll be, to try to help during COVID will probably be his message. But what do you think now, a month removed from when a lot of this stuff happened with Major, where do you think we're at? How do you think people should approach these kind of campaigns?
I mean,
actually, wait 1 second. If you maybe want to explain to people that are just hopping on, what did you actually uncover from his campaign, and then we can jump into that, because that might be a little bit more informational based, like what actually happened, because a lot of people probably don't even know what transpired.
Yeah, so I had kind of had a bead on Major Williams for a while, but nothing really got through to people. Before this video that I recorded, which I think you're alluding to, I wrote a whole op-ed about how it's time for Republicans to realize Major Williams is not a serious candidate for governor. This was due to his proposal on John Solomon's Just the News podcast, which is a big deal. John Solomon's a big deal. That he wanted to get rid of all state taxes, every state tax, and replace it with a tourist tax.
Sense.
When I heard that, I had to listen to it again and go, okay, so he just wants to tax tourists. And that was his plan. He says, we have 279 million tourists a year, definitely not now with COVID. And he said, if we lose 10 to 20% of them because we add this tax of like 20% to tourists, it doesn't matter. We'd still replace what we lost. And I was thinking about that going, okay, first off, I don't even think the math adds up.
That's a left-leaning approach too, right?
Yeah, let's tax the hell out of people. Second of all, it's completely unconstitutional. You can't do that under the Privileges and Immunities Clause. You can't tax out-of-state people differently. How do you determine who's in-state, out-of-state? Because there's people in California who travel from other places to be a tourist in parts of California. I mean, how many people travel to Disneyland in Orange County from California to go be a tourist in that area? So that's what I thought. This guy's really not serious. But the video was prompted because I saw his comment about, somebody said, well, who's supporting you? Who's behind you? Like, who's giving you money? And he said, well, it's all public. You can go and look at it. So I said, okay. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was doing some work in the office. I said, let me just kind of pull this stuff up. Started looking and I go, that's interesting. Let's look at his expenditures. Oh, okay. So this place called Lido House started popping up. And I had to look up Lido House, which turned out to be like this boutique hotel in Newport Beach. Then I started to see like the Ritz-Carlton. I saw thousands of dollars to like limos and luxury transportation. So that a lot of these things started to like add up for me, where I was just like, this is for a guy who's a grassroots, small time outsider candidate. He's spending pretty lavishly. You know, his top spending stuff is not. If you organized it by amount, his top spending was not like advertising, mailers, or stuff like that. It was all this stuff like the Alito House, staff meetings, and luxury transportation, expensive dinners. And you go, that's not what a serious candidate or a grassroots small donor candidate would be doing in this situation, especially if you're going up against John Cox and Kevin Faulkner, who are going to raise millions of dollars to fight it out. So I recorded the video and I put it online. I put it on my Instagram, and then all of a sudden it just took off like a rocket. So much so that it got Major Williams' attention. He recorded a live 15 minutes just talking about me and this whole issue. And I'm still kicking myself that I didn't screen record the whole live, because I got under his skin. And for a small time podcaster to get under his skin that badly, he was talking about, well, you thought I was poor. This is my lifestyle. I've always lived like this. So I'm just used to this. And I need security. That's why I stay at the Ritz-Carlton. Where do you want me to stay? Some like Fleabag hotel, like down by the, it was all these, like, he was very defensive about it. But I think the thing that really threw gasoline on the fire was his comment about Brendan Tatum. When he said, the guy who can't control his wife, which I was able to get a clip of, that just then poured more gasoline on the fire, and it just spiraled out of control.
I started campaigning when I was 23, and I'd be lying if there wasn't some times where somebody was saying something on social media and I just wanted to respond and just, chew them out, because that's just natural. And then also when your campaign's kind of your baby, you want to kind of defend it. And when people are lying, and people do lie, I'm sure he's dealt with liars, so he's probably trying to say everybody's a liar when there might be people that are, exposing something that he should have been arguably prepared for any of these things, right? He's had a year of campaigning to be prepared for any potential controversy. So, yeah, how much? I don't know if you know. How much did he end up, fundraising at the last period, or the period that you had looked up?
I don't know about fundraising. This was for last year, that cycle. So he'd raised like $300,000, and I think he still had like maybe $100,000 left. But I think at the bottom line, it was the fact that people saw that. And you had people who were clinging to hope that this Major Williams guy was the real deal. He was saying all the right stuff. And I always tell people, be careful of the candidates who give you all the red meat that you want to hear.
Yeah.
Because that just means they're like selling to you. And it was too good to be true for some people, and they were clinging to this hope that this guy, Major Williams, was going to come out of nowhere and save California after COVID, lockdowns, business closures, kids can't go to school. So a lot of people donated their hard-earned money during this time to a guy, and then to find out he's spending it on a lavish lifestyle while they may be struggling with their business or whatever. And I think that's what really ticked people off was, wait a second, you're supposed to be for the people, yet you're living like an elite on our money.
Yeah.
So I think that's what really kind of, that's the message I think that people got, and that's what really started to upset people about
it. Yeah, I don't wanna kick somebody when they're down or be a dead horse about it, but obviously, as a candidate that I make hours of calls a day. I have letters over here that I fold trying to fundraise. It's hard, man. It's really hard to fundraise. And to have people that, people that get $10 million or $300,000 in a quarter, and they squander it away when, someone like me, where I have a good message, I'm a business owner, I'm working hard, I'm down there doing it. It's incredibly frustrating from me, let alone, if people knew that they were giving money to something that, was paying for these lavish, trips and everything. So I totally get it. I always try to I probably am too cheap on my campaigns. I buy the cheapest envelopes, I buy the cheapest printer, I buy the cheapest. Sometimes I'm like, oh well, I shouldn't have done that. It broke. So I totally
But
get it.
I think back to your original point when it comes to what do you do with these candidates is actually my fiance said the other day because I've made a conscious decision, like you said, I don't want to keep bragging on Major Williams. This is not my goal. Is never to be the anti-Major Williams platform. There is actually an account out there. I think that's not my governor, not Major for governor or something.
Jeez.
It's dedicated solely to bragging on Major Williams. So I've kind of moved on. That's why I put the stuff out about Joe Collins. I got other stuff work coming out about Orange County Public Health Director Dr. Chow. But she said the best thing you can do is just stop giving this guy attention. And I think your polls are a good indication of how many people are disinterested. And I think when the merchandise sales and the fundraising starts to slow down for Major Williams and it's not economically feasible for him to continue on, I think that's when those candidates start to figure out I have to draw back because there's no way for me to move forward. If you keep giving oxygen to candidates like this,
That's what I was saying. Yeah.
He could run on this controversy for another month or two and keep saying, "Oh, we got to fight back against the lies and the smears. We got to stick together."
So there's two more topics that kind of connect to this and Major Williams. Let's talk identity politics real quick, and then we'll talk into divvying up the vote and how that all plays out. So identity politics. I think I saw a screenshot that he had pretty much said people were racist, and I got taken down. Is that correct? On one of his stories.
In one of his recent stories last week, he said that I think it was after everybody failed on his campaign that questioning a black man and his expenditures or his campaign spending is racist.
Yeah, and when I was analyzing his campaign video, I always feel like there's I kind of always tell it like it is even when I ran for office. So I'd say, we're only, in Orange County, I'd get some crap because we're only putting all these Asian Americans up because we're trying to run identity politics. What do they stand for?
Yeah.
If they're great candidates, tell me about what they've done. And finally, Michelle Steele got her to the point where she's like, we saved this much money when I was a supervisor, which was a really good message. I told her to expand on that in the general. She never really did, but that was my advice to her. And instead, everybody said, well, she's a female and she's Korean. That's not a strong message, I don't think. And when you obviously have been covering a little bit of Joe Collins and some of the stuff going on there, I find it kind of hard to not compare. A lot of these are using the same consultants, they're using the same formula. When you look at Major Williams' ad where he's walking through inner city, pretty much saying nothing, just saying how the city's in disrepair. People have asked me to do that for my campaign. Walk around Irvine and say, where's Katie Porter at? Well, one, Irvine looks really nice, and it's not because of Katie Porter. So I don't know if that'd be the best strategy. Look at this $2 million house. You can't afford it. It's Katie Porter's fault. That wouldn't be a strong message.
Look at all these nice malls and restaurants. This is great.
And that's not because of her or she didn't build those businesses. So I said it was a copy and paste where you have Kim Klacik, you have Joe Collins, and you have now Major Williams, which I thought was the worst version of the three, where you're walking through a city. In Major Williams' ad, he was actually in front of a judicial building, I believe, courthouse, talking about legislation, which doesn't make any sense. He should be in front of the state legislature. It just didn't. It didn't make any sense. And
it's about as much sense as his tourist tax stuff.
Yeah. And so, I struggle as somebody, obviously someone who runs for office, and I always tell it like it is, to not be politically correct, but also to be kind of honest about, there are people running because of identity politics. And I actually will admit, we put out our materials. I'd be one of our youngest congressional leaders in the country. That's technically identity politics to a point, although that's more, hey, I'm like a constitutional conservative. It follows up right with I'm pro-life, I'm pro-constitution, I'm pro-Second Amendment. It's the next line right after that. So people know, hey, I'm a young conservative that stands for this. I don't necessarily, it's obviously some form of marketing, but it's not like, maybe some of the underlying message that there was with Major last year, which if Major Williams was, for one, his name isn't really Major, or changed his name to be Major, so everyone thought he was in the military. But if he was white dude Major Williams, he wouldn't have never been 11% in one of my polls. I don't think for a minute he would have been. So people do think with identity. Yeah. And I don't mean that as an insult. I really don't. I think, I was on board with some of the things Major was saying, but as stuff came out throughout the process. So what do you think the role of identity politics is, not only in the governor's race, but in all these races that we're looking at? And how do we approach this? Because we already have the left saying that we're racist, and if we start having candidates say we're racist because we're saying, hey, this person's their only message is based off race or gender, or I try not to make it all about age. Obviously, it's one sentence in a 2-page letter at the most. So, what do you think?
I think there's a difference between running based on, I'm going to use my fiance as a good example. This is her opinion. She was told she had to vote for Biden because Kamala, or I think it was, she had to vote for Hillary and Kamala because she was a woman. That was it.
Yeah.
Don't look at her policies. Don't look at her past. She's a woman. If that's the only message that you're bringing, that's bad identity politics. There's good identity politics, which may sound like an oxymoron. And I'll use my fiance again. We had a candidate down here, Marco Contreras. His story that he had in his ad campaign, if you ever want to do an ad reaction, he's not running anymore. He lost to Shirley Weber.
If you have it, send it over to me. I'll do a
yeah, it's a very, very good ad campaign. We watched it and we were both like, whoa. So his story was, he was born in San Diego. Family couldn't afford it. They moved down to TJ. He grew up in TJ. His dream was always to be successful enough to move back to San Diego, live in America. He eventually did that. I think he went to school on a soccer scholarship or something. Don't quote me on that, but I think he went to SDSU. Then he became a business owner. There's a story behind Marco Contreras. And to someone like my fiance who went through the same exact thing, she was born in San Diego, moved down to Tijuana, grew up, went to SDSU. It was like she was hearing somebody like herself running.
Yeah.
And I think if there's a story behind it to connect you to the person running, it's good identity politics, because there are certain areas, like here in San Diego, that have a large Latino population. And if it perks someone's ears up to go, oh, Marco Contreras, I'm assuming he's Spanish. Oh, he grew up in Tijuana. My mom grew up in Tijuana. Oh, he's a business owner. Now you're getting to the meat of the message.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Where it's not just, hey, vote for me because I'm Spanish. I feel like that's like another example is Omar Navarro. Omar Navarro was like, I'm Spanish. Hey guys, I'm Spanish.
Look at my guns.
I'm Republican. Yeah, I'm Spanish. I'm Republican. Hey, come vote for me. And it's it doesn't work. This isn't a pissing match of which minority wins and a minority off. It's what speaks, and same thing with Michelle Steele. She lives I'm assuming in that area there's a lot of Asian.
She's right down the street from me, yeah.
Her story probably connects to a lot of voters. And if she has a good story that goes with it, that gets people to support her. So I think but then on the flip side, there's people who take advantage of identity politics. And yeah, I'll let you.
Yeah,
it looks like you wanted something to say.
Yeah, I agree with you on Michelle Steele. I think she could have ran an even better campaign if she would have talked about that stuff more. She didn't even really talk about it down here. I tried to give her, we met. I tried to give her as much advice as I could. Some of it she took, some of it she didn't. That's fine. No one has to listen to me. I'm not the expert on everything, really anything, I would say. I'm just a guy with a mic. So, but there's another layer of it that we're not even talking about it, which is, you're at an event. I've had people come up to me after events. Oh, I like that you're a young guy, this, and that. And I always say, well, that's not all I am. Yeah. But some of that, when you're talking about some of these other candidates, that will spread like wildfire. And then it turns into millions and millions of dollars, which you know, some of these firms, I'm sure will, you know, they're not going to say no to the money, but that money could be spent, you know, in like 45. Like we're working hard trying to fundraise, but it's hard this early, and
Yeah.
redistricting is, you know, hasn't happened yet. So it's incredibly difficult. And then you have people that are running that are taking up potential funding from other candidates. They're spreading. Yeah, I don't know what their letters or their outreach says. You know, I saw Joe Collins's um, uh, new commercial. You know, I actually say like, hey, 45 is a winnable seat. It's still like, you know, registration wise, it's winnable. It's probably going to become more competitive with redistricting. But in Maxime's case, that district's not competitive, and there's
Yeah.
just, you know, where is this money going? So, you know, there's us talking about it openly and being honest about it, but then there's this, like, you know, the whispers that kind of spread like wildfire that no one talks about. One person's at an event, hey, I like this person. Someone, I think he's been on one of your live streams. I'm trying to remember his name. Someone was upset that I didn't include him. He's down in San Diego, I believe. That I didn't include him. They said he's, you know, he's going to reach out to Hispanic voters. He's an Hispanic candidate. And I said, well, what does he stand for? And they said, well, I don't have to say anything to you. And I said, well, I can't remember his name. He was
Diego
on,
Martinez.
yeah, and I have no problem with him. I would love to have him on, you know, on one of these and talk to him. But I'm like, well, I don't know where he would pull. I would guess that he, you know, I haven't heard him besides, you know, your stream and this. No one's maybe probably heard of him. He's probably down where Earl was and where Rhonda was. So is my poll and my emails out to 2 million people spreading the word more than, you know, we'll get to that point with Major. Am I, by me talking about him, and I think you kind of alluded to this earlier, does that kind of give them more credibility than they would have had otherwise, or even just oxygen and attention? So it spreads like wildfire behind the scenes. I don't know how we can approach that. Obviously, it can be part of your story. I think you made that point. But I don't know. You have any other last thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, I think, that, and there's nothing wrong with, like I said, I think you can have someone who's representative of the district for that community, which is important because obviously the whole goal of our elected officials is to have people who are representative of our local district or our local assembly or wherever we are. So we want someone who represents our community. And just say, well, let's just run a Hispanic guy because there's a lot of Hispanic. Doesn't make him a good candidate.
Yeah.
But I think there's some people who figured out that they could just run based on their identity. Like, I challenge anybody to tell me the top 3 policies that Kimberly Klacik wanted to implement in Baltimore.
I don't know.
I don't know. Could you name the top 3 policies Joe Collins wants to implement? I don't know. But they have flashy commercials. And Republicans are kind of guilty of this too, at large. The party is kind of guilty of this too, of saying, oh, hey, look, like, here's Kimberly Klacik. You know, she's a black female running in this area.
You see it on Fox News, right? They
Yeah,
don't say they don't outwardly say it. They said, "Oh, she's in Baltimore" and all this, right? Like,
yeah, and it's almost like they're trying to prove so hard that Republicans aren't racist, yet they're obsessed with, like, oh, we don't care what your policies are, but you're black, so let's just put you out there. Or you're Hispanic or you're Asian, let's just get you out there. And that's not helpful to the party. Like, there are plenty of black Republicans who are doing a lot of good. Like, Nika Hamilton is probably one of the best candidates in California. She understands the game. She knows what's going on. But she gets no airtime. If she had a fraction of what Joe Collins did in the last race, she probably would have flipped that seat. That would have been one more congressional seat.
no, hey, I'd love to have as much money as he had.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like, I think I could do a lot more with it than what was done.
Like, was the how useful was that $11 million? I mean, it just went up in smoke, really. It just, because it didn't move the needle. If you looked at the 2018 run between Omar Navarro and Maxine Waters.
Well, let's not forget, he almost lost the primary to a guy that wasn't he in jail when he was running against, like, Omar had already qualified for the ballot? Isn't that how that played out? And he barely irked it out in the primary.
Yeah, he was like he got caught for stalking or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a weird situation. But
that district is just weird in general, like the way that we approach it. I will say this, and then we'll jump on to the next topic if that's okay.
Mhm.
As a campaign, we've obviously, you fundraise off at different topics, and I don't know what it is about Maxine, but if you bring her up in an email, it just seems like there's more money there. I don't know if it's because Fox News just rants about her so much that, and he, it's not his fault necessarily that he's the candidate that's there. If that's just the message, like I've never seen him. Well, maybe I don't know if I've ever seen anything where he said, "Hey, yeah, we're really close to winning." I'm sure he has, but I've never seen it like even in a commercial. So,
it's because she has notoriety. It's because you're putting one African American against another African American. So it seems like there's a chance there, but logistically,
to Joe Schmo in Missouri that gives $20 here and there, yeah, it would.
Yeah, and they say, I really want to stick it to Maxine Waters. Maxine Waters probably doesn't remember the last 4 people she ran against, to be honest. Like, she probably doesn't campaign. She probably doesn't have to campaign.
Yeah.
She has such a voter advantage. It doesn't matter. She
doesn't even live in the district, to his point, right? I don't think she even lives in the district.
To his point, yeah, she doesn't live in the district. I mean, it's a good example that they poured $11 million into a race there, and it wasn't even close. And
well, I don't know if they poured it into the race. To your point, you kind of uncovered some of that stuff. So
I mean, there was enough people who gave him money because they believed in the race, and he was published, and he was kind of put on a pedestal enough that there was $11 million. But it was all for naught. I mean, if you would spread that,
heck, if he was serious about winning, I would never do this. But I don't know what it is. I don't know. We talked about how some of the people changed their political affiliation to Republican. He could get through the primary and change his party to independent, and with $11 million, he could maybe give her a run for his money, or for her money.
Yeah.
But
he could run as what I call a dino.
Yeah.
Run as a dino, slip in as a Democrat in name only, and then you're like a blue dog Democrat.
Not suggesting he does this, but
don't
I'm saying,
give him any more ideas.
Yeah,
even more money.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a little bit of a discussion on identity politics. One thing I did want to talk about was the splitting of the vote concept. We had a couple races in Orange County where this played a role. So I did listen to your podcast where they did mention and I have maybe a minority opinion on this. I don't think so if you actually look at the data, if you actually constructively look at the data. In the Orange County supervisor race, I don't believe Republicans would have won if there was one Republican candidate. The Republican vote total was like 51.5%. There was a lack of enthusiasm, that was sure, and we had 3 candidates pushing the word out. So if you had one candidate, you'd have less people doing work, theoretically, right? You'd have less candidates pushing the message out. I truly believe that it was a organization issue, it was a candidate quality issue. And I think people were done with John Morlock, and the party tried to push him when he was clearly just way well past his time. Now, this doesn't apply to every race. Maybe that race wasn't winnable anyways. I mean, I don't know if you would have gotten behind any of the one of the 3 candidates if they would have gotten 50% plus 1. My theory is that 51.5 turns into 49 or 48 if you drop the other 2. I mean, remember, Morlock had COVID for like the last 3 weeks too. So the thought that somehow everyone is going to vote for someone just because they're Republican, that's what gets us into these issues, is taking votes for granted. And I think going into the recall, we can't take any vote for granted, but we also need to approach this the right way. I think, the Orange County Republican Party, I wasn't on Central Committee yet when they endorsed Morlock, but they would have been, well, one, I would never push Morlock. I think that was just not a good approach. He just lost an election in, November. And, he's had a little bit of a rough time lately, I would say, politically, where he's been on the downward trend if you just look at his numbers and where he's turning out voters. But we have to stop taking votes for granted. We have to bring candidates together when possible. I mean, sometimes when I run for office, I don't have any relationship with some of these people that I'm running against. And, you have people around you saying, hey, these people are like the worst person on earth, right? And we're kind of saying that. You alluded to it where, like, I guess Cox said that Faulkner was the same as Newsom. I think that was like something that came out, at least on TV or something, and I know that this is what I've heard. I don't remember when it exactly happened. But we have such bad relationships, we don't even get to the relationship building point, and then the party and the establishment tries to come in and, you know, make someone the chosen one, and then it just turns into people fighting with each other. Hey, I don't think we should, obviously there's no primaries in special elections typically, but if there's a primary and if it's an open seat, I think you should let everybody play it out and then build those relationships, and you support whoever wins. But what do you think about that? I think there's a certain approach that you have to handle some of these candidates with care, like I said earlier. Otherwise, you'll just push them more to run in spite of what you're saying.
Yeah, it's tough because it seems like the candidates who are the party candidates, like the establishment candidates, might often not be the enthusiastic candidate, like the candidate with energy. And I think we saw that in 2018. Is that like you had Travis Allen who had the grassroots and the energy, we had John Cox who's the establishment. Instead of just kind of rallying behind one person, kind of split it up. It's tough in California the way it is with the primaries and how it runs out, and the infighting doesn't help at all. There's like the Melanie Burkholder who I had on last week. She had this issue in her last week where she was also running against another Republican, Michael Murray. And instead of just putting all their eggs in one basket, this is the candidate. We're getting behind this candidate, and we're going to put all our energy into this candidate.
Mm-hmm.
They spent too much time fighting each other and wasting resources, and then getting to the finish line of the general election, already spending so much money just through the primary, and then you have to face an incumbent who's just sitting free. So it becomes it's not helpful, especially the way our politics is set up, where Republicans beat each other up on the way to the general election, and they might not even get in the general election. So that's an issue with the general primary.
Yeah, I mean, other states have primaries as it is, right? But yeah, if you see if it's top two, it plays a little bit of a different role. It'll be interesting to see how we approach this and how, if the party establishments try to have a say on the recall, if they try to pick a candidate. I think they will at some point. I really do. I would be interested in, I think that should be something that shouldn't just be people in a back room making a decision, or people that are elected officials making that decision. I think that's not the best way to go about it. And that's one thing that I've tried to kind of give us the option with our polling, is to give some people, and polling is not always 100% accurate. I think our next poll is people are reacting and they see somebody surging and they're trying to put their support. They don't want to pick the loser, right? But that can obviously shift back and forth, and people might not even run. So, I
think like one thing I kind of poked fun at the California GOP was they kind of played it safe all the way until it looked like the recall had momentum, which was a bad move on their part.
Do you know why? Can I jump in real quick? Do you know why they partially did that? Well, there was two previous recall efforts, right?
Yeah.
So they had fundraised off of the previous two recall efforts, and those recall organizers, they felt kind of slighted because the party wasn't providing any resources to them.
Yeah.
So just a little bit of maybe that's why they waited it out.
Yeah, and I think it wasn't actually, I read this in California Globe, this op-ed that at that time, I think it was the fall of last year, that really the Republicans had just one thing they should have been focused on, which was pushing the recall, because it was at like 800,000, 600,000 signatures. And they kind of played it safe too until it was popular for them to jump in. And maybe that's a bigger issue we could talk about in another podcast is in a state like California, playing it safe right now is not helping GOP.
Yeah.
Like, you're already losing voters year over year over year, and you're becoming more irrelevant year after year. So it doesn't behoove you to be complacent in a state like this. You have to kind of go on offense. Now, you have to go on offense strategically. You can't just go wild and be like, we're just going to do all these things to go on offense. But you kind of got to go on offense a little bit more and just stop being well, we're not the Democrats. We're not Newsom. So that could be for another show. We can talk about the strategy of the California GOP and why they don't go on offense.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said about how the way the party approaches things, and it's admittedly very frustrating as somebody who, has tried to put his neck out there and run. I do think, one thing that I've learned, and I think I wish some of these candidates, some of these guys have ran before and have lost races, is that if you don't see a pathway, there's not a great reason to stay in. You could really be putting yourself through something that you don't want to, when you look back. If it's right now, you're looking back 6 months and you're looking at this point, you could really have spent your time and your energy doing something else that you might have been much happier with. We only have so much time on this earth, and it would be unfortunate to be campaigning for some of these guys campaigning for 6 months when there's no pathway. So and that goes for myself, and it goes for other candidates. If you're in a primary and it's not looking great in terms of being the Republican candidate, or you don't even have like the funding or the message, at the very least the messaging to be able to combat, because you can spread a dollar really far. I've learned that if you're doing it the right way, then I think there's something to be said about stepping aside or thinking about how the big picture about your own life, because maybe not the most popular thing, but when you're running for office, your mental health is kind of getting beat up constantly. It's not easy on everybody, and you sign up for it. You sign up for the crap. You sign up for California Underground talking about you on their podcast, and and that's part of what you sign up for. I have people that have said the craziest things about me, and some of it I laugh at, and some of it they've turned some stuff, and it's ridiculous. So that would be my advice to anybody considering running, currently running, is to I know maybe it sounds selfish, but do what's best for you in some cases, and that doesn't mean go making money and having an extravagant life. That means, do you want to put yourself through this? Because it ain't fun all the time. And as I tell someone in my family, this is a little bit of a cuss, life isn't always pink shit and rainbows. It's not and you shouldn't act like it is, because there are going to be times, even when you love something, like I love campaigning, where there are downsides to it. Everything, your passion has downsides. Everyone's passion does.
Yeah. It's not easy. You get guys like me who are nosing through all your stuff.
Well, you should do that. There's going to be people that should do that. There should be I always wanted to be challenged. I think, I don't know if you've ever offered it. I think as we go throughout this process, I think I'll offer it if we continue to grow. We wanted to have 100 YouTube subscribers by 10 days, because it's hard to grow on YouTube. It really is, actually. But we're almost that. We might already be to that. Been doing this for 3 days, so I'd like to hit 1,000 next, right? And 500, and usually it grows pretty quickly. So giving these people a platform to talk about their campaigns would be a good approach as well. So obviously, I don't know if someone like Major is going to pick up the phone if you try to call them, but maybe some of these other candidates, if as you get closer, you can try to have them on, or I'm going to try to at least cover them, and if they want to come on and talk, they're welcome to.
Yeah, I've been focusing a lot on trying to get more state candidates specifically.
Yeah.
Nothing against congressional candidates.
How dare you? Just kidding.
But and this is something maybe I have an issue. Like, I was trying to record. I was trying to take your inspiration, do a campaign reaction video. Joe Collins, something computer freaked out. Oh, and then the recall was announced, and I hopped on live. So there's a lot of people who run on this belief that congressional people, or congressmen and congressional members, have this enormous impact, specifically on local stuff. Maybe you can say I'm batshit crazy, but your congressperson's job is to represent your interests on federal matters. Your state assemblyman or state senator is their job to represent you from the state. Your county supervisors are about your county. So when people kind of, like a Joe Collins comes out and says, look at how bad this is, look at how horrible X, Y, and Z is, like what has she done to fix this district? Is that really her job to worry? Like, if that's your worry to fix that area of LA, why not run for city council? Why not run for mayor? Why not run for county supervisor? You'll have a much more direct impact day to day fixing your local community rather than a Congress member 3,000 miles away. So,
well, I think, you know, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, or probably most of it, if not all of it. You know, if I'm fortunate enough to serve in the U.S. House, I wouldn't want to go to all the ribbon cutting that even people invite you to. I think it's just so cheesy, and that's part of the reason there's some issues with that politically. I do some of that stuff if people ask me to. Like we had a read across America when you were allowed to read Dr. Seuss at in elementary schools. I don't know if you're allowed to now. Here in Huntington Beach that I went to, and I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed, you know, talking to the kids and doing that. And those are things that I would do just out of, you know, before I was even elected or even when I was. But for every little ribbon cutting or every little thing, I don't know if a federal candidate needs to be towards that. I would even take it another step further about what you're saying, though. I don't even know if a local candidate needs to be doing all that stuff. I don't know if that stuff is productive to show up for photo ops, take a picture. It's productive maybe for the re-election chances, but it's not something I would want to do. I would like to be in the weeds of the legislation. But one last point, I think it's changed that way. Why he, you know, talking about Collins and other candidates, they're able to talk about that stuff because congressional members spend so little time in D.C. now. They are in their district probably, you know, I'd have to look at the data, but I bet almost twice as much as they are in DC. I mean, a lot of these guys, it's if you look at the data and the trends, I forgot what article I was reading, but it's like it's gone down over like the last 30 years of how often they're in DC. It used to be like a Monday to Friday thing, that was a Monday to Thursday, now it's turning into a Monday to Wednesday. And it's probably going to continue on that trend, and if it did, I would say we need a part-time legislature if that's what we're going to do, but people disagree with that. That would never happen. People don't agree with me on that. I think a lot of the state legislatures should be part-time because otherwise they get in the way. But I don't want to.
Yeah, I just.
Oh, sorry.
Just think I just think people need to kind of refocus and just kind of realize that if you want to change what's going on around you, you know, your congressional person doesn't really have an impact. I think Scott Peters is my representative.
Oh yeah.
I don't know one thing he's done for San Diego. I don't know what he's saying, but yeah, I know that his job is to go and be the voice of this area on federal issues, and maybe all those federal issues don't have anything to do with San Diego. So
yeah,
that's why I think people they fundraise off this idea of, well, if you send me to Congress, I'll fix our local communities, which kind of means
it's a big government approach, naturally.
Big government, and also if you send me to Congress, I'll make sure I bring home the bacon and I put a lot of pork dollars into our local community. How does that sound?
Well, I think we did lose our feed. It's all frozen up, but we've been going for a while anyway, so we got a lot of good stuff there. And what I'll plan to do is I'll probably put this out in its entirety and then cut it into segments and maybe publish it in little bits and pieces, maybe going out towards the end of this week. We got a couple other things that we're planning to put up on YouTube and continue to grow that. So people that are listening, it's probably audio right now. I think we lost our video. Find you at California Underground. Anywhere else that they should try to find you, Phil?
That's basically it. Just go to Instagram. That's the home of everything. You'll find the podcast there. Okay. All the videos and stuff.
Cool. Well, I've enjoyed following your stuff, and I really appreciate you taking the time to jump on board. This has been Politician Reacts YouTube channel. Make sure to like and subscribe. And if you're on Facebook, like and share. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
Thank you.